Welcome to This Week from the Principal's Desk, a podcast about Lutheran schools and their leadership. This is hosted by two Lutheran school principals. My name is Rob Lunak, and I'm the principal at Mount Calvary Lutheran School in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And my co-host is Mike Sheeman.
My name is Mike Sheeman. I'm principal at Bethany Lutheran School in Parma, Ohio. And today's podcast, Rob and I have been looking forward to this one. I think since we first got the idea, because the idea came from a listener. We had somebody that submitted a request of a topic, and I think that was great. It stretched me to think more about this topic. I think, Rob, I can speak for you that it did the same. And we've been talking a little bit about this to say how can we present on this and how did this impact us? So the topic itself is actually talking about transparency and communication from the administration to the staff in a school. Because, I mean, one of the phrases I think we've all heard before is you're on a need to know basis, but you don't need to know. But the question starts to become, what do the staff need to know? What are we in administrator roles supposed to share? What should we share? What should we not share? And there's a lot of things that I think we would love to chat about. We'd love to hear your thoughts too as you listen to this podcast. If you have other thoughts or ideas, we are an open book to receiving those. So I think for me, it was interesting when I first heard this topic, and then this happened in chapel this morning here at Bethany. We're reflecting on the commandments, and just so happens today, our commandment that was featured was the eighth commandment of you should not bear false witness against your neighbor. And the kids really did a good job defining it. Of course, with Luther's, what does this mean? Especially the part that we defend, speak well of, and put the best construction on everything. And I think that's some of the stuff that Rob and I are going to unpack today.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I think everyone has a different definition of transparency, so I think maybe we should start there. When I think of transparency, I think of like a window. And you can see to the other side, but you still don't have the full picture. And that's kind of like transparency. You don't hear, I'm looking out my window right now. I don't smell anything from outside. I don't hear much from outside. I'm not feeling a breeze, but I'm getting kind of a general picture. And when we talk about transparency, I think everyone wants the whole experience of what's going on, but that is something that, one, we don't have the time to deliver to everyone. Two, we wouldn't have all the details anyway, because every issue we deal with has multiple people, multiple facets. Unless you're in the situation, it's impossible for you to get the entire picture. So really what people are asking for is they want to know what's going on, and they want to know why it's happening. And that is one of those things that I would argue that it's actually better for people to have a trusting relationship. So some of those things, because you're going to get to a point where you go, I can't tell you. I'd love to tell you, but I can't tell you. I just need you to trust me. And I know people have heard that. And unfortunately, I think there are some people who have relied on that when maybe they could have been sharing more, or maybe they're covering up for a poor decision they made where they go, I'm not going to talk about it. Just trust me. And that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the bad part of that. We're talking about the positive aspect of that, where we can share the good things that are going on, and we can share some of the tough things that are happening and give people the details they need, but then also building healthy staff culture to recognize that you're not going to need all of the details.
Right. And I think, Rob, the trust point that you just made is absolutely vital. Building trust is something that is ongoing. And I would probably argue that that is really the foundation of this whole topic, because there are going to need to be times, like you said, when the response simply has to be, trust me. Well, you have that card to play, but it's not always wise to play, nor is it always one that you want to play frequently. But you should be developing that card so that when the time comes, the staff say, okay, I can trust you, I do trust you, and so I'm going to move forward with this. Now, typically in a situation, everybody's going to bring their own slice of that pie or their own perspective to a particular thing. But I think it's important for you to realize, as the administrator, you are likely the only one in specific situations, you're going to be the only one that has the entire picture. And so I think when people bring certain things to you, to be able to say, to listen, because that informs your picture. But then when you give a response or you have to fill in staff on a specific situation, sometimes you may just want to give them the result. You want to give them this is what you do need to know in order to be effective at doing your job. Because to like you said, Rob, to paint that entire picture it's not necessary. It's not timely even to be able to tell the whole thing. But one thing I've learned is that when the staff are asking you a question, it's usually because they feel that they need to know for some reason. And so sometimes I have asked the question, just tell me more of why you need to know that. And so maybe it's because they're being asked by parents or students about a particular thing. I know that the teachers with whom I serve, they want to be competent. And so if parents ask them something and they feel like they have no idea about it or it's blindsiding them, they don't feel like they're competent in discussing that with the parent. They always have the card to play of saying, I don't know, but feel free to go ask the principal. But they don't like playing that card too often either. So we want to equip our teachers so that they can say, I don't know, but we've talked about that as a staff, or I'm aware of it, and I fully trust that the principal has this under control. That's, I think, a really good way to approach that.
Yeah, and I like the way you put that. And here's a good phrase if you're a principal listening that you can take back and you can give to your staff. You can say, you know what, that's a great question for the principal. He'll be able to provide way more detail on that than I'd be able to. And that covers just about anything. You don't even have to go into I don't know because we hate saying I don't know. And we don't want to make anybody else look bad. We want to put the best construction on it. So we don't want to make it sound like the principal doesn't know. So one of those great phrases is, you know what, that's a great question for the principal. He can provide way more detail on that than I can. Take that back, use that. That will not get you in trouble, I promise. That's a helpful one to have. Now, as principal, you also want to look competent and you want to look like you know what's going on. So some of the time we can fall into a trap of hiding behind this kind of iron curtain and say, "Oh, no, don't peek behind the curtain, right? Don't do that. It's like Wizard of Oz. Don't ignore the man behind the curtain." And sometimes we hide behind that and we're a little less transparent because we don't want to be vulnerable and we don't want to look like we don't know what's going on. And that's why that trust in the eighth commandment are so important, because you can say to your staff, "Hey guys, this has been a struggle," or "I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with this, so I don't have a decision yet." Instead of making something up on the spot or going, "Well, I can't tell you," on things that maybe you could tell them. One of the other things that we'll talk about in my buildings is we'll do kind of a me, we, you. There are things I need to do. There are things we get to do. There are things you as teachers get to do. And decision making and transparency is the same thing. Sometimes there are things only I get to know. Me and maybe the board, maybe your executive director. When we talk about student discipline, staff discipline, when we talk about some budget things, there's some things that you got to play close to the vest just because it's the right thing to do with those. And then there are things that we all get to have a say in and we all get to see the process. And then there are things that you as teachers get the freedom and authority to make decisions. And you then have to be able to defend those and be transparent when people ask you. But I don't know anybody that likes to be micromanaged. So I think if your principal came in every day and they said, "Well, what show me this thing and this thing and this thing, and why did you do this and this for everything you've ever done during your day?" we wouldn't have the time for anything else. That's why that trust aspect is just so important. And when we talk about even different groups and different levels of kind of need to know, Mike, why don't you talk about that? What's the difference between maybe a board member, parent, student, staff? How do we separate all that?
No, it's a good question. I think the best level of separation that I can say to that would be we need to equip them to do their jobs. So if they need to know that there is a parent that called you that said that they're going family's going through a divorce and these kids are going to be affected, absolutely I'm going to tell the teachers that that impacts. If somebody calls and says, if somebody calls there's a bullying issue or whatever, I'm going to inform them. If somebody calls from the community and says, "Tell me about your LGBTQ policies," or something on a higher level, I'm probably going to vet that before I bring that up to the staff. So I think there are layers to this. So the layers with the staff, for me, if there's things going on with the kids in their classroom, they need to know. I also do something where I have a commitment to my teachers that if a parent calls me about them or about a situation in their classroom, my first question to that parent is, "Have you had a chance to talk to the teacher?" And if the answer to that is no, I end the conversation. And sometimes it's awkward to do because the parents are like, "But it's so bad, I need to talk to you about it." And I'll volunteer to go with that parent to talk to the teacher, but that my teachers here know they can rely on me that I'm going to say, if you haven't talked to the teacher, you need to do that first. And so we've modeled that as well. And that's worked really well. There's some other things too, though, that as the administrator, you're going to be privy to when it comes to details about staff and in their own lives, personal details about your staff. You're going to know the intimate details about the school, relational details, who gets along with whom. You're going to know the budget details. And frankly, money talks. I can look at your budget and tell you where your priorities are. And so sometimes you're going to have things that you cannot share. And I think as you continue to serve in a place, your longevity is going to help you with that. And this is not something a first year principal is going to have. But if you can say to somebody, you've been there for a couple of years, well, I see your concern with that, but do you remember how we addressed that in this situation? That's really the approach that I'm taking over here. So that's what you can kind of expect to see, even if they don't know the details. But I've always said too, I think principal's job is to exude confidence. Now, there are situations that I have faced in my career where I've been shaking in my boots and I don't know a clue what I'm doing with this particular one. But the attitude, the tone that you set from the top as the leader trickles down to your school. And maybe this particular situation you're dealing with has nothing to do with the other staff members, but if they see you shaking in your boots or hunkering down in your office or whatever, they're going to get their spidey senses tingling that something's wrong, and then they will create a narrative. Oh gosh, I must have done something wrong because he hasn't been in my classroom for 6 weeks. Oh gosh, what have I done? What have my kids done? And so I think it's really important to be aware of that so that you control the narrative and you don't let the grapevine do any work. So there have been times where I've said to the staff, listen, I'm sorry, I've been in my office for a lot lately. I'm dealing with something that's a struggle right now, or I'm dealing with something big, or I'm dealing with future planning, whatever. And so please forgive me, but I'm still available to you. I'm still here for you, and our school is a great place to be. Continue to exude confidence in the midst of any of that.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where we do get busy sometimes and things will take your attention and people look for stories to tell themselves about what's going on. And that can either be a story they heard from you or that can be one they made up. And if you're anything like me, the stories you make up are the worst things that could possibly happen. I was shoveling snow a couple years back, and the next day, my back kind of hurt. And the story I told myself was, oh my gosh, I must have something wrong with my kidneys, and not, oh, I hurt myself shoveling, right? Because in my mind, I was too young for that to happen. But it's all about the stories people will tell. And so to be able to speak confidently into a situation and give people enough information to fill in some of those gaps when appropriate is a good thing to do. Now, on the flip side of that, don't be upset and try really hard not to get defensive when people come to you and ask questions about things you haven't told them about. And that's something I struggle with because I go, "Whoa, why do you need to know?" And I'm like, "Okay, hang on, wait, pause." Here, they're curious because while not everybody has the same level of need to know, everybody has the same level of want to know. Everybody wants to know, and so they're just trying to put pieces into a puzzle that has been a little blank for them. Let's get into some examples here because I think it's a really nebulous topic, and I think there are probably people listening who go, "Well, what about this thing that my principal didn't tell me, or what about this thing that I didn't tell my staff?" And let's break it down a little bit. Let's say we'll start with the hardest one, I think first, staff discipline. That's the toughest one because you want to put the best construction on everything. You want to protect people. You want to do right by people. So if there is a teacher at your school who is not living up to their Christian values or to their school contract or to their professional standards, know that your principal is dealing with that and your school board is dealing with that. And that, in almost all cases, is being handled if you don't know about it. And so, and I've had this happen where teachers come to my office and like, well, nothing's happening about this with this person. And I go, well, do you know that? I'm just not telling you what's happening because I wouldn't discipline anybody publicly. I'm not going to like call somebody out in a devotion every morning and be like, you didn't do this thing. And I just want everyone else to know that you didn't do it and I'm dealing with it. That's not something we do. That's not the right way to do something. So in that situation, I would say the teachers on your staff, if you have a teacher that's struggling, everybody already knows that. That's not a surprise to anybody. What they don't know is if anything's happening with it. And in that situation, the very best thing you can do is build trust and let people know I'm handling it, but I can't tell you how because that's not a polite thing to do. That's not the right thing to do. That's not the kind thing to do. But just know that I'm dealing with it. Okay, let's look at student discipline next. If you have a middle school kid who gets in some trouble, does everyone in your school need to know about it? And I think the answer depends on the size of your school and how involved all the teachers are with that kid. I think if you have a kid that something's going on at home and it's nice to be able to share that with teachers and go, hey, we can pray for this kid. What an opportunity we have. Keep an eye on this kid. Let me know if you notice anything. Let's just support this kid a little more. If it's a kid got in some trouble on social media, do you tell everybody? That's a tougher one. I've told the teachers directly involved, hey, this happened. We're dealing with it, FYI. But I didn't go tell the kindergarten teacher who's never going to interact with that kid, hey, this happened with this kid you never see, FYI. That's a little tougher one, and I think that depends on your context. There are going to be some times where that's appropriate and sometimes where there's not. You want to handle long-term planning, Mike?
Yeah. So I think with long-term planning, this is a fun one because this can go in two different ways. Um, the I would say in general, the staff want to know what is the school going to look like in 2, 3, 5 years. Pick your number, and it's important to give them that vision. And I think you give them the vision of what you want the school to be, so that they're working toward that. We want to be in this place, running these programs with this enrollment, how we serve our community. You really want to paint that picture and you communicate that like crazy. But let me flip the cards because I think there's going to be some people listening that might be in the opposite boat where budget is tanked, enrollment is tanked, and is the future of the school may be in question at this point. You're not going to go to your teachers and say, you might not have a job next year. You don't want to paint that kind of uncertainty for them, but I think it's okay. You also don't want to surprise them with it, that one day you walk in and there's a whole set of pink slips for everybody, because that's clearly there's been stuff working up to that. So I think it is okay to say to them, it's no secret our enrollment's down. The budget's not what it once was. So what do we need to do about this? We need to pray. We need to go straight to God because this is his ministry. He's blessing it and he wants this school to succeed. Now, in the midst of that, it's okay to say things like, I'm working on some things, or I'm reaching out for some support from me or for the school or for the school board. And we're doing everything we can so that this place can look like this in a few years. And again, paint that positive picture. So you don't want to ever detail doom and gloom. And maybe you feel right now like doom and gloom is your reality. Well, to a degree, you can control that reality to a degree, but keep on going to where the full control exists. Go to the Lord, go to him, ask him for guidance and ask him for help. So, I mean, maybe I'm dwelling a little too much on the negative end of things, but either way, I always encourage people to involve the staff one way or another in what the school looks like in the future, because they are an active part of it.
Yeah, and that's a great thing to do because you're a team and you as principal are not be all end all in any context because you are there to be a servant leader, not just a leader. The servant part comes first. And so that means that you're there supporting people and they're working with people and they're making sure that there is trust and openness and vision, as Mike said, because you do need to paint a little bit of a rosy picture because people aren't going to buy in the other way. Trust me, no one's going to buy into doom and gloom. So you have to exude that confidence, and we do have confidence to exude because we have great ministries and we have God working through what we're doing. Okay, let's get into something that's probably a little touchier here, and I see you added this into the show notes here, Mike. The leak. What if you go out on a limb and share someone with someone in confidence, and then that confidence is broken? And I think I've been bitten by that before. I think because you put in the show notes, you've been bitten by that before.
Yep.
So what do you do, Mike?
So yeah, what do you, because we do as administrators sometimes need to share sensitive information with the staff. I mean, and at the end of the day, it's your discretion as to what you share and what you don't. But if you share things, then all of a sudden you're hearing about it coming at you from a parent or from a group of people, and they're like, yeah, you really think the only way they may have heard about this is through a specific staff member. Sometimes it means having a difficult conversation with somebody, and just to say. I'm not encouraging to go on a witch hunt, but I'm going to venture to say that if you have somebody who's a leak on your staff, you already have an inkling as to who that person is. So I've always done the thing where I don't want to paint it to the whole staff. Somebody here is leaking, and therefore I'm not telling any of you anything. No, 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 no. I think it's again relation. It's a relational approach to that to go to people and say, listen, I shared this I don't know if there's a misunderstanding or what, but I shared this in confidence. Do you know? I heard about this from a school parent who actually has a kid in your class. Do you have any idea on maybe how that happened? Like, start the conversation. We can't be afraid of hard conversations. And hard conversations, they're hard to have by virtue of not just by virtue of their name, but you're you could be seen as coming across accusatory or inflammatory. I mean, whatever. But sometimes we need to have those conversations for the health and safety of our school. When I started as a principal, I had a full head of hair, and if you saw me now, it's gone because you're putting yourself out there. You sometimes aren't going to get the reaction that you want. But if you have somebody on your staff that you can't trust, it's a detrimental to the entire team because then you feel like you can't totally share with the staff or you have to be reserved, and then you're changing what you would normally do because of the actions of someone else, and everybody is paying that price. So if you have that leak or that suspected leak, again, make sure that you're very clear on your parameters because there are things that you share with your staff that need to be shared, things that maybe are allowed or permitted to be shared but not actively promoted, and then things that should not be shared. Make sure that you are clear with what you're talking about in each of those given areas.
Yeah, one of the things I'll look at to figure out if I have a healthy, trusting, transparent culture is if someone comes to you as the spokesperson, you're not being transparent enough, you're not communicating enough. And if nobody comes to you with any questions, even individually, you aren't giving any type of vision that they'd want to ask questions about, right? So I think if you have nobody ever asking you questions, trust me, they didn't all get it. I hate to break it to you. You are not the best communicator in the world. Somebody's got a question. They're just not asking you. And if you have somebody who's like, well, people are asking, well, that's a bad sign too. And sometimes that person's not being honest about it, or it's they said it in a room full of teachers and nobody said, well, I don't have that question, so they thought everyone agreed with them. That does happen too. So I would look at those. If you have somebody who's always the spokesperson, or if you have nobody asking questions, that's probably a sign that you could be a little more transparent or forthright with the teachers you have. Now, Mike, you put Ephesians 4 here, and I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so I wanted to share a resource. My pastor has decided that he's meeting with the ministry team here. We're doing this weekly, and we're reading a book together called "Holding Up the Prophet's Hands," and the subtitle is "Supporting Church Workers." We're in difficult times, and sometimes to know what to share or not to share is hard because we deal with really hard things. Well, one of the sections in the book had some great advice. Basically, the author picks apart Ephesians 4:25 to 32, and he talks about a community that is marked by certain behavioral and ethical characteristics that is connected to Christ looks like this. And he outlines these. And I think this is important to share because they're really good things. So the first one is to tell the truth. And Rob talked about that earlier. You don't want to make a picture up. If you have to tell something, make sure you're telling the truth because people will see through that. The next one is don't let emotion cause division. Satan likes to creep in and try to create cracks among us. And sometimes he'll use emotions to do that. People will become heated on a topic that's near and close to their heart. One in Ephesians 4:28, it talks about just simply to work. Do honest work every single day and with your own hands so that you can share with those who are in need. The other ones, and I'll just whip through them quick because there's a bunch. Speaking graciously. So again, that's talking about our words when we do talk about things and to people. Remembering our baptisms, Ephesians 4:30, you are a child of God. And so remember your baptism, and I don't think we want to ever overlook that. The next one is getting rid of the negative and destructive stuff. Let all bitterness and wrath be out of our mouths. So we're not talking about people or breaking the eighth commandment that we started with, but put bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander, put it away from you. Live out the Christ-like attitudes and behaviors of your new identity as a child of God. The next one is simply love. Love people. That will drive a lot of what you share and what you do, is how you love people. 3 more. One is sharing feelings liberally with others. I talked a little bit about that earlier. It's okay sometimes to say, I'm really struggling with this one and I need prayers. Be human with your staff. Let them know you do need to exude that confidence, but it's okay to say, would you pray for me? I'm wrestling with something that I'm just having a hard time with, or I need advice on. 2 more, avoid vengeful thoughts and behaviors. That's Romans 12, repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. And the last one is make it your aim to do good. So if you play this podcast back and you have Ephesians 4, starting at verse 25 open, and you read through, you'll see how passages link to those particular things. And I feel like using those as an example, it's a good almost filter, if that's maybe the right word, as to, should I share this? How do I share this? How do I exude confidence? How do I do all things on my own? You don't. You do it with Christ, because in him you can do all things, Philippians 4:13.
And I think that's great, because so many things sometimes we look to our own strength for things. We look to our own understanding for things. And to be able to have a Bible verse to point back to, we should almost make a whole podcast episode about the decision-making process through that. we might just have another idea there. I think that we'll probably have a couple more episodes about decision-making and transparency. There's just so much here. And so if this has been helpful, good. We're glad about that. If you have other topics you want us to cover or other specific things you'd like us to look at, let us know. We do read those. You can send Mike and I an email. We've put our phone numbers out in other ones. I'll maybe drop phone numbers in the show notes for this week. So text me. That's fine if you have a question. I will respond to you. That's okay.
Me too.
Mike, any last things? Otherwise, we probably can close in prayer here.
Yeah, I know that this is tough. I know it's hard to discern what do you share, what don't you share. You're not going to make every decision correct every single time. And that's okay. Give yourself some grace too, knowing that you're a child of God who he's called to lead at the place where you're serving.
That's a great way to end it. And then let's pray. Dear God, we pray for our school leaders. Bless them with wisdom and discernment as they make decisions that impact the lives of their students, teachers, and staff. Grant them patience and compassion in dealing with difficult situations and the ability to lead with grace and humility. Strengthen them in times of stress and give them the courage to stand up for what is right. We ask for your protection and guidance over all of us as we continue to make a positive impact on the lives of those around us through your grace and mercy. Amen.